once a month, I'm going to review every single Rocky movie that's ever coming out leading up to the Rocky spinoff Creed, which comes out in November. And in case you're wondering, yes, I have seen the trailer for that, and it was awesome, and it's everything that I'd hoped this movie to be. But right now, I'm not going to talk about that. Today, I'm going to talk about Rocky 2. I've already reviewed the first Rocky. If you want to see that, the link is in the description below. Now, Rocky 2 takes place exactly after the first film. We see the last 10 minutes of the film with that final fight, and it was a tie, but Apollo wins the fight, and Rocky, he's reunited with Adrian. Rocky and Apollo, they go to the same hospital, where Apollo, he challenges Rocky to a rematch, but then Rocky, he announces that he is retiring. Rocky had to get surgery on his eye because he took some really big beatings to the point where any more damage to his eye, it could cause blindness. But as for him winning the match, he's real popular right now. He won a lot of money. Everyone, he's found some newfound fame. He has a lot of benefits now, and he just got an agent where he offers him a job for a bunch of commercial endorsements, and this allows Rocky to ask Adrian to marry him. And so she does. After this, they bought a house, a car, a jacket, some jewelry and stuff. Pretty much this fight is about the aftermath of the fight and how much success Rocky gets, but then it quickly goes downhill from there. Because all that success, it doesn't last for so long because he only got but so much fame from it. When Rocky's filming the commercials, it doesn't go as well. And we learned that Rocky, he's not much of a strong reader. So Rocky, he tries to find a bunch of jobs to get by. He takes an office job, but they won't accept him. He works at the meat factory that Paulie works at, but eventually he gets fired after some success for it, and they had to cut him for budget cuts. Tony Gazzo even comes up to him and asks him to be an enforcer, but he doesn't want to anymore. But apparently fighting is all that Rocky knows how to do, and it's the only way he can get by and support Adrian and his now pregnant wife. And Rocky gets the opportunity to fight again once he accepts Apollo's rematch, because Apollo got frustrated with the hate mail he was getting, and they called that fight a fluke and that he should have won. Now, personally, I love this installment of Rocky more than the first film because it's pretty much Rocky after the first film. And we see him go from success to damn near rock bottom until he has to get back up and fight again. Now, granted, you can argue the first film, he was fighting for himself, but in this film, there's a lot on the line. He has to fight for his family and to support his family. And when Adrian disapproves of this, you can tell how Rocky's feeling about this. And fighting is all he got, but at the end of the day, he just wants to do what he can to support Adrian. And if that means fighting, then he's gonna do it, damn it. But you can also see where Adrian's coming from, because he's getting too old for this, and because of his eye, it could damage him. And after fighting with Apollo, seeing how good he is, and she doesn't want to lose Rocky. But the driving force in this movie is the relationship between Rocky and Adrian. To me, Rocky and Adrian are like the rags to riches to back to rags to back to riches story. Because we see them have success in the first part of the film, but then they go back, and Adrian, she has to go back to her old job, and Rocky, he's doing whatever he can, and he's struggling. And to me, like, seeing that, especially for a movie that was back in the 70s, I really find that fascinating. I just like seeing people doing whatever they can to get by, and, like, to me, that's real inspiration for me, because we can actually connect with them and see where they're coming from. Pretty much, I like it because it's relatable, and it makes us feel like if they can come from this, then so can we. But I just love how they illustrated that, and I love how they illustrated the dilemma between Rocky and Adrian. Hell, one of my favorite lines from this movie is when Rocky, he's talking to Adrian about this whole situation, and he's like, Adrian, I know they asked you to stop being a woman. Please don't ask me to stop being a man. Terrible Sylvester Stallone accent. Hell, even Mickey, played once again by Burgess Meredith. At first he's concerned for Rocky with his health conditions, but after Apollo publicly insults Rocky, he changes his mind and helps him. Now Mickey starts training Rocky again, but Rocky, he is unfocused because of his disapproval from Adrian. And Mickey continues to berate Rocky, and after Paulie tries to confront Adrian about this, she faints and she is rushed to the hospital, where she goes into labor and their son is born. But unfortunately, Adrian falls into a coma. Now this scene alone, despite everything they've been through, they're still dedicated to each other. Even Rocky, while Adrian, she is lying in her bed in a coma, Rocky, he's just standing there by her side, and he apologized for everything he's done because he feels like everything was all his fault. And he even says, I don't want to see my son until Adrian wakes up. He wants to see them together, because ultimately that everything Rocky does, he does for his family. And that's what I love about this movie. It's relatability, and it makes Rocky feel more human. But luckily, Adrian, she wakes up and she sees Rocky right beside her. Now after this, the third act is absolutely my favorite part of the movie. It's when they finally see their son together, and then Rocky, he's like, hey, Adrian, if you don't want me fighting anymore, I understand. I don't want to do it anymore. And then Adrian, she's like, I want you to do one thing for me. Win. And then Rocky's face lights up, and he's finally got the approval from Adrian. And then Mickey, he's like, well, what are we waiting for? Let's go! Like, he didn't waste no time. He was like, all right, you heard the woman, let's go. Come on, let's go. I just find that really funny. But again, the third act for me really brings it home for me, because it's like he's finally trained, he's focused, and we finally see that classic montage with some new music this time. But when we finally get to the second montage, and when he's running all through Philadelphia, and this time the children are behind him, and I totally forgot to mention this in my review for the first Rocky, is the music for the montage. It's Gonna Fly Now by Isaac Hayes. I absolutely love that song, and it is the poster child for music to play during workouts. I don't know, it's just something about that song that just makes me feel like I can do anything. But it definitely worked this time around for this movie with the montage and the kids flying behind him, and this time Rocky, he's really, really, really fighting for something more than himself. Now, quick side note, now for Apollo Creed, like Apollo Creed, he wasn't really the villain in the first movie, but in this movie, he's kind of more so the villain. Because Apollo, he really just wants to prove that fight wasn't a fluke. But even his trainer, he tries to tell him that Rocky, there was something about him. Every time you kept giving them some, he just kept fighting and punching. And they try to warn him, but Apollo's like, no, I'm going to prove that this fight wasn't a fluke. So now we get to the final fight. Now, I actually love this fight more than the fight in the first film, because both of them are giving it their all. There's a lot more at stake in this fight. And the tension building up to the fight is cool, and the tension during the fight was. But Apollo's goal is to knock him out within the first 2 rounds, and Rocky now has to fight with his right hand to protect his eye instead of a natural southpaw. But against all odds, Rocky manages to survive, proving that first fight from the first film was not a fluke. And now they have finally reached 15 rounds, just like they did in the first film. By this point, Apollo has built a lead on points that Rocky cannot possibly beat. However, Apollo's obsession with knocking out Rocky leads him to trade blows with Rocky. Now, the big finish is particularly my favorite part of this fight. In the final round, Rocky switched tactics and is now fighting with his right hand again. And he lands a tremendous blow on Apollo that knocks him out. Now, after this part, I just love because both of them, like again, they pretty much both hit each other because Rocky punches him and then Apollo goes down, but then out of exhaustion, Rocky, he goes down too. And now the ref, he's counting it down, and they're both fighting to get back up and be the first man standing. And I just love the camera work and the tension of them both trying to get up. And when the ref finally calls and Rocky gets up, I just love that part. Rocky, he is in contempt. Rocky, he is happy. Everyone is cheering and calling his name. Rocky wins the fight, and I love how the story wraps up. With Rocky, he's on the microphone, he's thanking everyone. He even thanks Apollo for fighting him. He said, other than my son being born, this is one of the greatest days of my life. And the heart and soul of the story, Adrian, he calls her up and he says, I just want to say one thing. Yo, Adrian, I did it! And then she's looking through the TV, she's crying, and she thanks him, and she loves him too. And then, boom, that's the way the story ends. Like, to me, that right there was the perfect way to wrap the story and the last movie up. In the end, Rocky 2, in my opinion, was a great step up from the first film, and if not, it's on par with the first Rocky and can stand tall with the first Rocky. And I just love what they did with the story and how they continued the characters. And I just love how they continued the story, the characters, the plot, and it continued to be inspirational and relatable. It's a good story about how Rocky's success from the first film, but then he immediately goes back down, and then he has to, and the stakes are higher, and he tries everything he can to support his family, and then he fights to prove to himself, and in the end, he ultimately wins, and he won not only for himself, but he fights for Adrian, his city, you name it. And I just love the energy this movie had, especially the third act and the ending. And the ending to the movie wrapped the story up in the perfect bow. I'm going to give Rocky 2 an A++. Thank you so much for watching, and again, once a month, I'm going to review every single Rocky movie that's ever coming out, leading to the Rocky spinoff Creed, which comes out in November, as well as what I'm doing with Star Wars right now. So therefore, in the month of August, be on the lookout for my review of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and Rocky 3. That's it for the day. If you like what you see, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to my other channel. The links are in the description below. And be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Periscope. Peace.